Okay, today's class is dedicated in honor of Chana Bas Clara. May Hashem protect you and the entire Jewish people and all of our brothers and sisters in Eretz Yisrael and around the world during these challenging and also special times. Amen. Thank you very much. I also want to announce that this will be the last class. We're going to be taking our break for a few weeks. So next Tuesday is Tisha B'Av. Next Tuesday there'll also be a class for the entire community, a lecture here in the tent. Everybody is invited, men and women. They'll send out a notice with the details. That's how we do our Tisha B'Av lecture. So that's going to be next Tuesday, which is Tisha B'Av. However, the weeks after that, we're going to be taking a break for several weeks of the women's class, and Be'ezer Hashem will resume and we'll send out the notices to everybody. If you are not on the WhatsApp list for this class, please sign up with Mrs. Miriam Klein, who sends every week a notice about the class on Monday. Not sign up? Huh? Yeah, sure. Yeah. Please. Okay. Thank you very much. Sometimes you could look at a story that seems superficial or even strange and enigmatic, but it contains within it a tremendous amount of depth and relevance and lessons and empowerment in people's lives. And in today's class, we're going to explore a conversation that is recorded some 17 or 1800 years ago in the Gemara. It's a conversation that is obviously riddle-like. It was communicated in riddles, meaning enigma, in a mysterious way. At the surface, it seems like almost a very childish conversation, even a foolish conversation or a petty conversation. But the fact that the Gemara records it is very, very strange. Like, why are you recording this conversation? You'll see in a moment what I'm talking about. But here we'll explore how this very strange conversation really opens up vistas to very profound reflections on life and on history, including now on the 9 days which we are presently in. So you could see in your source sheet, this is a quote, this is quotations. They don't hear? Okay. Okay. You could see in the source sheet, these are a series of quotations from the Gemara Talmud, B'chayres Ches Amud Beis, Tractate B'chayres, page 8. Tractate B'chayres deals with the laws of a b'chayr, which is when an animal, a sheep or goat or ox, a calf, is born, and the b'chayr, the firstborn, is considered sacred kaddish. So that's the tractate that deals with the laws of b'chayres. That's why it's called b'chayres, which means the firstborn, like a b'chayr. On page 8, the Talmud tells the following story. One of the greatest sages of the Jewish people, who was also considered the greatest spokesman of the Jewish people at his time and a great debater. His name was Rabbi Yehoshua ben Chananya, Rabbi Yehoshua, the son of Chananya. He was a Levite, a Levi, and he was still from the Meshorim. He was one of the vocalists at the end of the second Beis HaMikdash. As you know, in the Beis HaMikdash, there was a daily concerto, a daily concert, with musicians and vocalists. You can have up to 120 vocalists and 120 musicians. So this was a serious symphony. This wasn't a small little kumsitz. And every day during the public communal offerings, known as the Karban Sibur, in the morning and the afternoon, the Leviim and some Yisraelim would join the symphony. They would sing, and there were those who accompanied them with musical instruments. This was an extraordinary sight every single day in the Beis HaMikdash. And Rabbi Yehoshua ben Chananya, the person who we're going to be discussing, was one of these Meshorim. He was one of these vocalists. He was also, as I said, one of the greatest sages of his time. And during that time, Jews were often asked to debate philosophers, kings, governors, ministers, sages in the Roman Empire. And Rabbi Yehoshua ben Chananya was considered the man chosen for this task because of his sanctity, his brilliance, his precision, and his eloquence, and of course his wisdom. During his time, he experienced the destruction of the second Beis HaMikdash. He was a colleague, a student of Rabbi Akiva, and they lived through one of the darkest periods of Jewish history, which is the destruction of the second Beis HaMikdash, which of course happened on Tisha B'Av, the 9th of Av, in the year 69 after the Common Era. In the Hebrew calendar would be 3,829 since creation. 3829. I know some people put it at 68 after the Common Era. Some people 70. It's a question of 2 or 3 years. 68, 69, 70. But certainly during that period, either 3828, 3829, or 3830. That's since creation. Today, of course, it's 5784. So, Rabbi Yehoshua ben Chananya is summoned by the emperor, and he wants him to debate 60 philosophers of Athens. Athens is, of course, the capital and the center of Greek philosophy. Athens was the home of the great Greek sages, scientists, philosophers. You could sit here, there's chairs here. If you want to sit here, if you want, I mean. Okay. They were called Sabi the Bey Atuna. Sabi means the elders. The Bey means of the house. Atuna is Athens. Athens was the center of the greatest Greek philosophers, including the most known ones. You had Socrates and Plato and Aristotle. Plato was a student of Socrates. Aristotle was a student of Plato. Aristotle was the tutor of Alexander the Great when he was a child. His father Philip hired Aristotle as his tutor, and then this man became Alexander the Great, Alexander of Macedonia, Alexander Magdon as he's known, who conquered the world, Alexander the Great. But this is all in the beginning of the second Beis HaMikdash. However, this story takes us to the end of the second Beis HaMikdash, a few hundred years later, and Rabbi Yehoshua ben Chananya is summoned to debate 60 sages of Athens. These are considered the greatest philosophers and thinkers of the time, and the king wants the Jew to debate all 60 of them. And the Talmud records the entire debate. The challenge is that when you read the debate, it seems like a baby conversation. There doesn't seem to be any intelligent exchange. We don't know what they're asking, what he's answering. It's almost like little cute jokes or anecdotes, one after the other, one after the other. And you're like, these are the 60 greatest philosophers debating the greatest Jewish sage. Here you'll have an example of a few. They're written in Aramaic, the language of the debate, but I brought from Safari, I took the English translation as well. There's many, many more. I just chose a few as an example. It's a page and a half, around a page and a half of back and forth, back. So they ask him a question. This is their way of challenging the Jewish sage and defeating him in a debate, which is what a debate is. You want to defeat your opponent. Uritzutza demis mehecha nofik ruche. They asked him, in a case of a chick that dies inside the egg, from where does its spirit exit? This is their brilliant problem. A chick develops inside an egg. The egg is sealed from all sides. Sometimes, hopefully, the chick will survive and emerge from the egg and we'll have a new chick. But sometimes the chick doesn't make it, the chick dies inside the egg. So their question is, where does its spirit, they call it ruche, ruche is like ruach, it's nefesh, it's soul, where does its spirit come out from? That's the question they ask him. And with this they're trying to intellectually denigrate him, destroy him. What's his answer? What do you think his answer is? His answer is, Rabbi Yehoshua says to them, Mehecha da'ol nafak. From where it entered, that's where it left from. That's the answer. Gewaldik. The spirit had to go into the egg, into the chick. The same place, the same exit. The exit door we used for entrance, we used for exit. Boom, he won. Okay? Like, fine. We got it. Take a look at the next line. Milcha kisarya b'may molchila. The sages of Athens asked another question. When salt is spoiling, it's getting rotten, with what do you salt? Salt in order to preserve it. We use salt as a preservative. You keep it in salt. You know, when meat has to be transported, they keep it in salt, etc. It's a preservative. So milcha is melach, salt. Kisarya, when it goes bad, sour, like the word sour is connected to the word sarya. But my molchila, what do you salt with? What do you put into the salt to preserve it, to keep it fresh? Great question. This is their challenge to the great Jewish sage. Amar luhu, he answers to them, besilta de kudanisa, with the placenta of a mule. A mule is giving birth. There's a placenta. I don't have to explain what that is. You take the placenta of the mule from its womb, and you put the salt in the placenta, and it's preserved. That was Rabbi Yeshua's answer. Oh, so they turned to him, they said to him, Umi ike silta lekudanisa? Is there a placenta of a mule? A mule is sterile. A mule doesn't reproduce. A mule can't have a placenta. That's only if there's a fetus. What are you talking about? So Rabbi Yeshua says to them, O milcha misari, and the salt spoil? Boom, we're done. He won the next debate. Next one, let's see another one. Mishra de sakini b'may kotli. How do you harvest a field of knives? You have a field, but instead of having grain or other forms of herbs, vegetables, fruits, whatever it is, you have a field with knives. How do you harvest a field with knives? So Rabbi Yeshua says, Bekarna de chamra, with the horn of a donkey. So they said to him, Umiyika karna lechamra? Is there such a thing as a horn of a donkey? Donkeys don't have horns. So he says to them, Umiyika mishra de sakini? Is there such a thing as a field of knives? Boom, he won the debate. Which egg came from a white hen? Of course, both eggs looked identical. They were white eggs like the eggs you buy in the store or you get from the farm. But one came from a black hen. That's called zuksa uchmasi. Uchmasi is black in Aramaic. A dark hen. One came from a white hen. A white chicken. Which one came from which? Of course, when you look at the egg, you won't be able to identify which one came from which. And from this, they wanted to win the debate. Since he couldn't identify which egg came from which hen, he lost, they won. So he brought his props. I see lahu iyu tre gvini. Rabbi Yeshua went and he brought 2 slices of cheese. Gvina is cheese, gvini. 2 slices of cheese. Amalu, and he says, this cheese was curdled. This cheese was curdled from milk. The milk was taken from a female goat. But heidi is uchmasi veheidi is chivarsi. Which of the cheese comes from a black goat, and which of the cheese comes from a white female goat? They're like, we don't know. He won. Again, he won the debate. And you read this over and over, different themes. At some point, they ask him to build a house in the middle of the air. I mean, all these types of strange things. It would be cute for a puppet show. It would be cute for a circus. It would be cute for a night activity in camp, maybe. I don't know with today's kids, but at least 55 years ago when entertainment could be simpler. And it's certainly interesting exchanges. But you're talking here about great minds, 60 philosophers of Athens. Rabbi Yeshua ben Chananya, considered, as I said, one of the G'dolei Hadar, the greatest of the time. And what are they talking about? So all of the commentators understood that these were all riddles. They were all symbolic. They were sharing deeper ideas. The way they communicated them was through this style. And part of the wisdom was you had to understand what the other person was saying. So it wasn't only you had to figure out what to answer, you first had to figure out the question or the challenge, and then you had to figure out what to answer. So everything here is done in an enigmatic-like fashion. And it's fascinating that there were complete books written in order to explain this. For example, the Vilna Gaon has a book, has an entire booklet, a sefer, that explains these debates, what they represent. The Marsha, who was one of the greatest Talmudic commentators, one of the greatest rabbis in Poland in the 16th century, 17th century, Rabbi Shmuel Eliezer Edel's, his mother-in-law's name was Edel, and he was named after her because she supported him and his wife. So the Marsha was a rabbi of Chelm for 9 years in Poland, and he wrote an amazing commentary on Gemara, and he has a whole long section explaining the symbolism. The Maharal of Prague, Rabbi Yehuda Leva of Prague, also has a whole section explaining it. Rabbi Nachman of Breslov in the Likutei Maharan has a whole section explaining this. Rabbi Yitzchak of Barditchev has a Sefer Kedushas Levi, a whole section explaining these debates. And everybody has completely different explanations. It's interesting to make parallels. The same questions, because it's so open-ended, how are you supposed to read these things? Everybody has different interpretations. But in this class, I want to focus on the interpretation of one of the great Talmudic commentators who I just mentioned, the Marsha. Marsha is an acronym for Mardenu Harav, as I said, Reb Shmuel Eliezer, Reb Shmuel Eliezer, or Edel's. As I said, his mother-in-law's name was Ada, or Edel. And he has a commentary known as Chidushei Agadois Marsha, which means he explains the homiletical stories throughout the Gemara, in addition to the other part of his commentary, which is Chidushei Halachas, which explains the Talmudic analysis. And the Marsha gives a very, very interesting, fascinating commentary to all of these questions and answers, what was going on and what they symbolized. He says it briefly, concise. I'm going to try to elaborate on his words and try to explain at least the way I understood it. And I want to try to cover a few, maybe even all of them, but at least a few of them. Let's begin with the salt. When salt gets spoiled, how do you preserve it? What were they referring to? So the Marsha says they were referring to Judaism. Remember, here were the 60 sages of Athens. So they were considered the towering intellectuals of the time. They're talking here to one representative of the Jewish people. And they look at him. They say, what has been your preservative over the generations? Remember, this happened approximately 1800 years ago. This is shortly after the destruction of the second Beis HaMikdash, which was 1,900 years and change. The Churban happened 69 or 70, and now we're in 2024. So Jewish history has been going on already a long time, a very long time. Because Matan Torah, Maimon Har Sinai happened almost 3,500 years ago. Avram Avinu lived around 3,700 years ago. So you're talking about a long time already till then. And they turn to him and they say, this is your salt, it's your preservative, but your preservative is getting spoiled. And it's time for you to bring salt in order to save your salt. And what they were telling Rabbi Yehoshua ben Hanania is Judaism has gotten stale at this point. There's a lot of other isms and movements and political movements and powers and empires that are trendy, that are popular, that are powerful, that are capturing the world. And Judaism is completely on the decline. This was one of the worst times in Jewish history because the Romans not only destroyed the Beis HaMikdash and destroyed Jerusalem, but they also killed enormous amounts of Jews. Those who survived, they sold into slavery. The price of a Jewish slave was then less than $1. That's how many slaves there were. And they especially hunted down the Jewish leaders, and they wanted to literally eradicate every last vestige of Judaism and the Jewish people, to the point that it seemed extremely bleak. So at this point, they turned to Rabbi Yehoshua ben Hanania and say, your salt maybe worked for a long time, but it's really getting spoiled, and you need to update it. You know how they have updated versions of things, right? There's Microsoft 7 and 8 and 9 and 10. There's versions. Your iPhone, you update it. You have to update it. How do you do this? So Rabbi Yehoshua ben Hananya says, we need the placenta of a mule. What is he saying to them? They right away respond, and they say, a mule doesn't have a placenta. And this is how Rabbi Yehoshua ben Hananya challenged them. They were telling Rabbi Yehoshua ben Hananya that the old Judaism that was given to you at Maimed Har Sinai, it's not going to work anymore. It's going to lose it lost its appeal, it lost its interest. The salt is going bad. You need new energy. Bring in a little bit from the Roman culture, bring in a little bit from they were essentially Greeks. They were the sages of Athens. The world wasn't on the Greek dominance, it was on the Roman dominance, but still they represented the aristocrats and the philosophers of Greece. So they said that's what you need to bring in order to revive the salt. Rabbi Yehoshua ben Hananya says, give me the placenta of a mule. They say a mule doesn't have a placenta. And what Rabbi Yehoshua ben Hananya was saying is, you want me to update the salt with things that don't have a future. What you're looking at is something that's very temporary. I have my eyes fixed on eternity. And you have to understand, his example of the mule is very brilliant and profound. Because, if you know what a mule is a breed, it's a mix, it's a hybrid of a male donkey and a female horse. Kilayim, they bring together a female horse with a male donkey, and the offspring is called a mule, a pered in Hebrew. It's not a sus, it's not a chamor. A sus is a horse, a chamor is a donkey. A mule is a pered. Who came up with this idea? Very simple. A mule has the advantages of a horse and a donkey. It's much more, it has a better immune system. It's stronger on its feet. It has more power. It gets less sick, less diseases, less vulnerable to diseases and infections. They wanted to take away the chesroinus, the flaws of a donkey, the flaws of a horse, take the advantages of both, and that's the mule. So at the surface, a mule is a perfect product. Much better than a horse, much better than a donkey. It gets the advantages of both. Both the blessed genes of mom and the blessed genes of dad. There's only one issue. You know what the issue is? The first generation is the last generation. It doesn't reproduce. It's not real. It doesn't have the power to recreate, to reproduce. There's no new generation. So this is what Rabbi Yehoshua ben Hananya was saying. You want me to update it with things that seem very flashy and trendy right now. Our eyes are fixed on eternity. So sometimes something can be very, very powerful and very engaging and very overwhelming, but there's no future to it. And the reason there's no future to it is because it's not rooted in the rhythm of eternity. It's not rooted in netzach, in nitzchias, in eternity. It doesn't have that power of longevity, authenticity. So when they say to him, the mule doesn't reproduce, he says, yes, and the salt doesn't spoil. I don't need your mule to reproduce. This was his response. Let's get to the eggs. They bring 2 eggs. One came from a black hen, one came from a white hen. Which came from which? He says, I don't know. 2 eggs, they're identical. They both look white. Or maybe another color, maybe they were dark eggs, but he didn't know which came from which. So they said, we win the debate. Says the Maharsha, what is this about? And then he brings 2 pieces of cheese, which is from a black goat, which is from a white goat. I mean, come on, what is this? So the Maharsha says, it's much deeper than you think. Those who grew up on a farm, or those who have chickens in their backyard, those few families who still are lucky enough to have chickens in Muncie, and you eat those eggs, you know that the lifespan it takes for a chicken to sit and warm the egg that it lays until it produces a chick is 21 days. It's 3 weeks. Chaf Aleph Yom. That's basically the time that it takes. And this is very, very unique how a chicken does this. I don't know if you ever took note of it. Somebody once asked the holy Reb Shlomo Zvila. He was one of the great tzaddikim of Yerushalayim. He passed away in the mid-1940s, and they asked him, how you educate children? What's the secret of parenting? He said, go to a farm and look at a mother chicken sitting on the eggs. That's how you parent. They said, what are you talking about? He said, take a look, you'll see. She's not detached. A helicopter. She's not completely aloof and sublime and removed and tells the egg, just do your own thing and raise yourself. Because she knows that if the egg doesn't get the warm and the fluffy experience of the feathers of mom, a chick will not be able to be produced. On the other hand, if she sits on the egg with all her might, you know what happens to the egg? The egg cracks and no chick gets produced. So God gave mom, the chicken mom, that special sensitivity to know exactly how to sit on the egg in a way that it doesn't smother it, control it, crush it, put its own pressure on it, project its own insecurities, pain on it. I'm adding this. He didn't use those words. But put whatever she needs to put on the egg because of her own stuff. On the other hand, the opposite extreme doesn't run somewhere, you do your own thing, but rather has that presence of warming the egg and allowing the chick to emerge at the right time. And we know sometimes we want to do a favor. I was once watching a chick struggling to come out of the egg, and with all my heart, all I wanted to do is just crack that egg open. Let the chick come out. It's like when you ever saw the caterpillar metamorphosizing into the butterfly, and it's struggling. And all you want to do is just extricate it. And the farmer told me, if you crack this egg, you will deny the chick its muscles that are vital for its existence. You will do it a favor and liberate it and kill it at the same time. Because a few days from now, it will not be able to survive. Every one of these struggles allows it to develop muscle that is essential for life. What a lesson. So I didn't crack it. I waited and watched until she got out, or he got out, whether it was a female or a male, I don't remember. And so the Marsha says this takes 3 weeks. She sits on the egg for 3 weeks, and she knows exactly what it's about. After that, there's a chick that's ready, and it begins the fight to emerge from its container, its egg, which used to be an incubator and now will become a prison. Which is also very important, that what is at one point an incubator and essential to life, at a later point becomes a prison. Sometimes in life, we have things that at a certain point protected us. They were our incubators. They were our homes. They were the places where we became safe. If that chick wouldn't have that egg, it would never be able to live. But at some point, that very place of safety becomes its greatest trap and a death sentence and a prison. And it's hard because now it's like time to go. It's time to go out. This takes 3 weeks. So the Marsha says they brought 2 eggs. What did they mean by 2 eggs? Representing 2 sets of 21 days. Because each egg is a product of 21 days of the chicken sitting on the egg. So 2 eggs represents 2 sets of 21 days. And they said to him, one came from a black hen, one came from a white hen. Do you know which one came from which? He said no. They said, you see, we won. And the Marsha said, what did they mean? They meant to say there are 2 sets of 21 days in the Jewish calendar. In the Jewish calendar, there are 2 sets of 21 days. 21 days is, of course, 3 weeks. That are both marked and commemorated in a unique way. What are those 2 sets of 21 days? The first one we are presently in. It's called the 3 weeks. 3 weeks is 21 days. Bein HaMetzarim. The word Bein HaMetzarim means what? Between the borders, between the boundaries. Stuck. It says in Eicha, Lamentations, Kol Roitfeha Hisigua Bein HaMetzarim. The reason it's called Bein HaMetzarim is all those who pursued her reached her. Bein HaMetzarim. Stuck between the Mitzarim, between the confinements. So just like the chick is in the egg, and it takes 21 days until it emerges. So the first set of 21 days is the Bein HaMetzarim, from the 17th of Tammuz through the 9th of Av. As we spoke in previous weeks, we learned about the 5 calamities that occurred on the 17th of Tammuz. There's the 5 calamities that occurred on the 9th of Av, and that's why these 3 weeks were designated as a time of mourning, a time of commemoration, and a time of Avelus with all the limitations and halacha of the 3 weeks and especially of the 9 days. That's one egg. There's another egg in the Jewish calendar, another set of 21 days, very different. And that's from Rosh Hashanah through Hoshana Rabbah, through the end of Sukkot. The first 21 days of the month of Tishrei includes the 2 days of Rosh Hashanah, the 7 days of Tshuva, the 10 days of Tshuva, the 10 days of repentance from Rosh Hashanah through Yom Kippur, which is the 10th of Tishrei. Then you prepare for Sukkot. You have the 7 days of Sukkot, and then you have afterwards a separate holiday Aden, Shmini Atzeres, or we add in outside of Eretz Yisrael, Simchas Torah, the 9th day as well. The first 21 days of Tishrei, from Rosh Hashanah through Hoshana Rabbah, that is 21 days, 3 weeks. It's 2 eggs. One came from a black hen, one came from a white hen. This was symbolic. One egg was born from darkness, from grief, from destruction. The second egg emerged from whiteness, from festivity, from joy. Rosh Hashanah is a holiday of renewal. Yom Kippur is a holiday of cleansing, of tshuva. Sukkot is a holiday of joy, Zman Simchasenu. The greatest joy was Simchas Beis HaSheva. And it continues for 7 days, Hoshana Rabbah. And we have the residue after the 21 days. And the reason is, the Chazal say that the king told the family, and I celebrated with the nation for 7 days, and now I want you to stay here for 1 more day so we could just have our own intimate celebration. Bayu nagalgal aniva ata. So after the 3 weeks, there's like the leftover, I want you here for 1 more day, and that's Shmini Atzeres. So one is an egg born from darkness, from bleakness, from negativity. The other egg is born from light, from whiteness, from cleansing, from purity, from renewal, from joy. Can you identify which egg comes from which? He said, I can't. And for them, this was a demonstration of one of the great ideas, especially in Greek philosophy, was that everything is random. Your days of goodness and your days of darkness are identical. You don't even have 1 extra day of goodness to triumph over the darkness. It's all basically about luck. Some cookies crumble in different ways. Some eggs crack at different points. Your days of goodness and your days of darkness are identical. There's not even 1 extra day of joy over the day of darkness, which means it's like an equal scale and everything in life is random. And furthermore, it's obvious, they said to him, that your second set of 21 days, the 3 weeks, canceled out the first set of 21 days. You have the first set of 21 days, which was given in the beginning of Jewish history. Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Sukkot, this goes back to the Torah itself. Now in history, you were given a new set of 21 days of darkness. Obviously, why is it 21? What an interesting random number. Because the second cancels out the first. It wipes out the first. Your journey is over. Your destiny is over. Your idea, the trajectory of Jewish history has come to an end. Your whole idea and your whole vision for yourself and for the entire world has been canceled out by the second set of 21 days. In addition, they say, well, it's all anyway random. And that's why it's just 21. If you want to look at it from a purposeful point of view, 21 cancels out 21. You want to look at it from the Greek point of view, it's just random anyway. And that's why you can't even identify which egg came from which. It's just life happens. Some days are good and some days are just bad. Some days you wake up on the right side, some days you wake up on the left side, some days you look outside, the sun is shining, and some days it's just spaghetti hits the fan. Or if you want, sushi hits the fan, or whatever it is, and the rest of the day is very exciting. It's just how it is. A very pessimistic, but from their perspective, very realistic point of view, where everything is just, good luck and make the best with what you have, but it's essentially a depressing philosophy. So these 2 eggs was not a simple challenge that they posed. They were presenting a very profound challenge. They said, you even can't see the difference between the eggs. Isn't that so interesting? Because it's both 21 days. So Rabbi Yehoshua ben Hanania took out 2 pieces of cheese. And he says these 2 cheeses came from 2 goats. And the 2 goats also have different colors. One is a dark goat, a black goat, just like you have different colors of hens and chickens, you have different colors of goats, like sheep. So you have goats that are black, you have goats that are white. We all know that. And they both can give milk. Female goats give milk. They feed, they nurse their offspring, they nurse their children, their calves. And as a result of that, this milk can be curdled into cheese. But do you know which cheese came from which goat? And they said, we don't know. And they look at him and they say, you won. What just happened? So the Marsha says, Rabbi Yehoshua ben Hananya gave them a very, very powerful response. And he said, you guys misunderstand the entire perspective of the Jewish people, and I'll explain it to you. And it's similar to the mistake they made with the salt and the mule that we spoke about earlier, the placenta of the mule. This is a continuation of that. 2 goats. Marsha says he was referring to, obviously they were well versed in Judaism. They knew about the 21 days here, the 21 days there. They were extremely well versed. And they also knew about what the 2 goats represent. One of the services on Yom Kippur, one of the key moments of Yom Kippur was known as the service, the avodah of the 2 goats. Shnei Seirim. This is a Parshas Acharei Mos. Aaron, the priest, the high priest, and every generation the Kohen Gadol would take 2 goats. One goat was put on the right, one goat was put on the left. He would then choose 2 lots, a goyrel. He would make a goyrel, like a lottery from a box, take out two lots. One was LaShem, one was LaAzazel. One was called for the divine and one was for the Azazel. And they were placed in the 2 goats. And it seemed like just a random situation. Why was this goat got this goat got this? We don't know. Could be the right, could be the left. And the fate of these 2 goats was very different. One goat was offered in the Beis HaMikdash, and its blood was brought in the only time of the year into the Holy of Holies, and it was sprinkled in front of the Aron, Achas L'mayla v'sheva L'mata. And even in the second Beis HaMikdash, they didn't have an ark anymore. But they had the space of the ark where they have the Even Shasiya, what they call the foundation rock, that they still identify over there on the Temple Mount, the Even Shasiya, where the Aron apparently was. And then in the second Beis HaMikdash, the Aron was hidden at the end of the first Beis HaMikdash, so it shouldn't end up by the captors. So Yoshiyahu, the king, realized that the end is coming, so he hid the Aron and he hid the stuff that were together with the Aron, the oil of Moshe Rabbeinu, the anointing oil, and the Tzinsenes Haman, the jug of the man, the Shemen HaMishcha, the stick of Aaron that blossomed with almonds that we spoke about, Parshas Korach, the Urim V'Tumim. He hid all these things so they didn't end up by the captors. So in the second Beis HaMikdash, they didn't have the Aron anymore, but they had the rock on which the Aron stood. In the first Beis HaMikdash, and the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur would go in and sprinkle the blood of this goat, only time of the year, and he would burn incense over there. This was one goat. There was a second goat. This goat was sent to the Azazel mountain in the Judean desert, at the outskirts of Jerusalem. You could still go to the mountain that they call the Azazel mountain. I don't know if it's mamish accurate, but I once went there on a Jeep. And there was, I felt a little bit like the goat because the driver was really, really, really being very risque. And it was quite an interesting experience, an intense experience, I should say, more than interesting. And what happened was, this goat was sent to that Azazel. In English, there's an expression called a scapegoat. Where did this expression come from? It came from the Torah, from this expression, because this goat carried on it all the sins of the Jewish people, so they called it the scapegoat. In English, they called it a scapegoat. You know, everybody needs a scapegoat. It came from this goat. It's not a Jewish expression, scapegoat, but I'm just saying it originates in this incident, in this mitzvah that happened on Yom Kippur. So you can't compare the 2 goats. One goat was brought into the Holy of Holies. One goat was sent down the mountain of Azazel, and it apparently carried all of the sins of the Jewish people. It did carry, it says V'nasa, it carried on it the sins of the Jewish people. And Aaron and the Kohen would tie on the horn of the goat and on the stone nearby a scarlet red thread. And when they sent the goat down the mountain, it was transformed into white. The pasuk says in Yeshayim, Yiyu chata'echem kashanim kashelag yalbinu. Even if your sins are like scarlet red, they will become white like snow. So symbolically, even though the 2 goats looked identical, but symbolically, they represented completely 2 different realities. One was a reality of darkness, of sin, of mistakes, of transgression. That was one goat, the Sar Azazel. Other goat represented The goat that was brought into the Holy of Holies and became a carbon and goes up to God in the highest level. So symbolically, you have two goats, opposite, completely opposite. And yet, the choice between them is a random choice. It's like, boom, boom. Why this? Why this? I don't know. So you could say, and if you think about it in life, you could sometimes look at two different lives. One life, sometimes in one family. You could look at two children in one family. One life ends up in Kodesh HaKadoshim, in the Holy of Holies. The other life ends up in Azazel. What does Azazel look like? It was a steep mountain, it was a cliff. Once an animal or someone goes down that cliff, they're not going to survive it. And sometimes in life, a person ends up in an incubator of the Holy of Holies. They're surrounded by the Aron, they're surrounded by the Luchas, they're surrounded by God's glory, and another person ends up on a cliff. And I'm talking here not necessarily physically, but emotionally, psychologically. Fighting battles of steep mountains, trying to stay afloat. And you say, why did this goat end up here? Why did this goat end up here? And we love giving explanations. But the Mishnah says that the two goats were actually identical. They were identical in what they looked like, they were identical in their height, they were identical in their value. And the only thing that chose the fate of this goat and this goat was Goyrel. Goyrel at some point, at the surface, seems like completely random. It's almost a mistake. Why did you win the lottery and I lost the lottery? I don't know. I should have won. I always say that. I don't know why somebody from Wyoming or Kentucky always wins $300 million. But as is this, it's a Goyrel. When I'm going to start debating and philosophizing. But how do the Jewish people look at Goyrel? We don't look at Goyrel that it's a mistake. We look at Goyrel is that the connection of me to some things are beyond what I can understand with my logic. We say, Ashreinu matov chalkeinu, umanoyim Goyreleinu, umayofa Yerushaseinu. What are these three things? How fortunate, Ashreinu, we are fortunate, matov chalkeinu, how good is my chelik, my part, my lot. Manoyim Goyreleinu, how pleasant my Goyrel. My Yafa Yerushaseinu, how beautiful, how splendid, how aesthetical my inheritance. In every person's life, there's three parts. There's Chalkeinu. There's your part in life. Sometimes people will go to a coach or I don't know to who and try to figure out what they're good at. And it's things that you get involved in. You feel that this works with your skill set and your resources and your upbringing and your education and your knowledge and your talents and your circumstances and your life's gifts. It's Chalkeinu. People forge out for themselves a path based on their life circumstances. And sometimes very successful. You realize I'm good at this, I'm not good at this. This is my liking, this is not. There's other things, Yerushaseinu. This you thank your mother and father for. It's our genetic inheritance. It's things that we inherit generationally. Very positive things and sometimes very challenging things. They call it today epigenetics. Our genes carry a lot of things from previous generations. There's a professor, her name is Professor Rachel, in Mount Sinai Hospital. And she interviewed, I believe, 40,000 children of Holocaust survivors. And she discovered that trauma is something that goes into the genes. You would think genes has to do with metabolism, has to do with my height, it has to do, what do I inherit from my parents' genes? It has to do with the physiological features of the body. She said that's not the case. She showed that the stories of people's lives gets ingrained in the genetic makeup of the person. So I could bequeath to my children not just the physiological fact, but also ideas, beliefs, stories, emotions, experiences. And sometimes you see children are dealing with stuff and you wonder what they're dealing with. And they're dealing with your stuff or your parents' stuff. Don't blame them. I mean, it's not always the case, but it's sometimes the case. And the same is true with previous generations. So things get passed down, both in the positive and in the challenging. That's my Yafa Yerushaseinu. And then there's Manoyim Goyreleinu. Goyreleinu are things that seem completely random, like out of the blue. How did this end up in my life? It's not what I chose, it's not what I'm connected to, it's not even what I inherited. It's like, boom, it's Goyreleinu. And when you look at these two goats, sometimes you look at two children in the same family, or just generally two people, and they end up in such different places, and you want to right away blame this one or that one, and sometimes there's things to certainly blame for, but sometimes it's just a Goyrel. A Goyrel means there's a divine journey for every soul that is inexplicable always in rational terms. That's what Geirel means. It's Lamaila min haseichel. Not because I'm not connected to it, but because my connection to it is one that I'll never be able to understand intellectually. It's not necessarily something that makes sense, that in my brain I figured out why I have to be here. This is beyond us. We once spoke about this at length, Purim time. Because Purim, what does Pur mean? Pur means a Geirel, right? Pur hu a Geirel. Haman was throwing all these Geirelas to figure things out. And Purim is like Yom Kippur. Purim is Yom Kippur, which is, as we'll soon see, part of this. Why did they name Yom Kippur Yom Kippur? So it says in Zohar, Yom HaKippurim is Kippurim. Now it's very funny because the two most opposite days in the Jewish calendar are what? Purim and Yom Kippur. Purim is a festive day. Purim is a happy day, unless you're doing really big Shalach Manasa. And your teenagers are smoking and throwing up all day. But without that, it's a happy day. And Yom Kippur is a somber day. Let's put it this way. No drinking and there's no eating. Right? Yom HaKippurim is Kippur. So either we don't know what Yom Kippur is, or we don't know what Purim is, or we don't know what both are. But there's a deep connection between them. You like my humor? Esther didn't want to go into Achashverosh to ask him to nullify the decree of his prime minister Haman against the Jewish people, because she said, my husband is a crazy Persian nut job alcoholic from Iran. And if you know the Iranians and the Iranian kings, first of all, they hate the Jews, and second of all, he killed his first queen. He has no problem killing his second queen. This is a suicide mission to go into him. This was a pretty rational thing, Esther told Mordechai. I know this guy. I've been married to him. He's an addict, he's an alcoholic, he's a nut job, he's a tippish, he's not an Ibigish Pitzte Chacham, he's not a wise person. Haman has him wrapped around, and you're sending me to go in and plead for my people. I'm going to come out with one head shorter. That's how it works by these guys. These monarchs, you go in without permission, you come out, and you could call the Chevra Kadisha. So what's the point? The Jews will die and I will also die. At least let me remain alive in the palace and I could figure things out. Mordechai responds to Esther and says, don't think that you're going to be saved from all the Jews. The fate of the Jews is going to befall you too. Don't think you're going to hide. That's my first message. There were Jews before October 6th. They thought, I'm a humanitarian, I'm a feminist, I'm a secular, I'm a Democrat, I'm left-winger, I'm an atheist, I'm barely Jewish, I'm an Israeli, I don't believe in any Judaism, I'm pro-peace, I'm everything. And suddenly they saw, you're the same Jew like every other Jew. Al tadami b'nav, that's the first thing Mordechai said. And this is not because it's not insulting to you, it's because of your holiness. The second thing he tells Esther is the Jewish people will be saved anyway, regardless. But you will lose your opportunity. The last words he says to her is, who knows if this is not the reason you became the queen? Who knows? Mi yodeya. And we once spoke in a class of Purim, you would think that Mordechai should speak with more conviction and say, not mi yodeya. You know, at the end of the Seder we say, Echad mi yodeya. Who knows? He should say, Ani yodeya. Echad ani yodeya. I know this is why God chose you to be the queen. He doesn't say that. He says, mi yodeya. Who knows? Almost like ambivalent. Like, who knows? So you want me to go in and risk my life and come out or not come out? You want me to jeopardize my life, put my life in absolute danger because he hasn't invited me for 30 days. And if you go in without permission, he doesn't extend his scepter, he kills you. Achas dasei lahamis. Why? Because you say, who knows? For your question, who knows? I should go put my life in jeopardy? I should go into a lion's den? The answer to this is, Mordechai wasn't being ambivalent. He wasn't being speculative. He wasn't trying to sit on the fence and says, who knows? Maybe, it's like buying a lottery. He was responding to something. He was saying, Esther was asking a very deep question. It wasn't just a physical question, it was an existential question. How did I end up in this mess? Esther was a wonderful Beis Yaakov girl. Or maybe Beis Sarah, Beis Ruchel, B'nai Tzion, Brur Shalamit, Nevei, Beis Rivka, B'nai whatever, B'nai New York, B'nai whatever. And she was a valedictorian of all these schools. All of them. I don't know how you're of all of them, but she was. And the Shatchanim were already going crazy. And then she ends up with this Persian Meshugana. How did this happen? This was a very deep question. Like, this was not part of the trajectory. And this Mordechai told her something very profound. And that is mi yodeya. This is not something we figure out through das. This is not something you could use your rational, perceptive mind, like with a mathematical equation, to figure out. This is something that requires you to open yourself up to a journey in life that is rooted in infinity. The source of logic is also created. The source of reality is beyond logic. Mi yodeya was the message that Mordechai told Esther: if you want to be able to live your life to the fullest and fulfill your mission, you need to go through a paradigm shift. And the paradigm shift is let go of the control that we like to control things through understanding. Not because we're stupid, that we believe in stupidity. No, we're not. We like to use our mind. The mind is a blessing. The brain is an incredible blessing when it can be used. But sometimes, remember, the same egg that is an incubator becomes a prison. The same brain that in so many ways is a blessing can become a prison when it holds me back and it keeps me frustrated and resentful, because this is what my life is supposed to look like based on my logic. Asheinu matov chalkeinu, yes. Mayofer Yerushaseinu, yes. But then there's a special prayer, Manoyim Goyraleinu. Can I embrace my goyrel? Can I embrace the life's journeys that are beyond my trajectory, beyond my expectation? I don't know why I ended up with this challenge, but I didn't end up in this challenge. I was placed there because my soul's mission is deeply connected to this particular journey and was given the power to go to those places. And here in parentheses, I'm going to go to the other debate. We're going to get back to the eggs in a moment with the chick and the spirit. The chick is in the egg. It died. Where did the spirit go out from? What type of ridiculous question is this? But they were asking something very deep. They weren't stupid people. They said, I understand. They're Greeks. They're philosophers. I understand the concept of a soul. I understand the concept of spiritual consciousness. I get that. But now you're stuck in an egg. This is spiritual consciousness stuck in an egg. It's stuck. How is it going out? And Rabbi Yehoshua ben Chananya says the way it came in, that's the way it came out. What do you think is the argument here? This is a very deep argument. The question is, can the soul ever get stuck in an egg? The Greeks understand that a soul essentially is a transcendent reality. It exists before one is born. It exists after one dies. It's a soul. I got that. But this soul came down and came into a prison cell. And there it's confined. And there it's defined and confined. Now it seems like it's stuck. And what this is referring to in life is exactly this situation. I understand that when my soul was free, it was free. But the soul comes into the body. That's our own egg. And the soul lives in embodiment. And the body goes through a lot of different stuff. Does that not define the soul? Does that not grab the soul? Is it not possible that somebody's soul and somebody emotionally, psychologically gets really stuck in their life? And there's no way to get out of it. Sorry. You went into this prison, maybe not your fault, maybe inadvertent, maybe God chose it, nature, nurture, circumstances, everyone in their own life. But this is what I'm dealing with. I can't escape it. You're in an egg, and the egg is sealed. Rabbi Yehoshua ben Chananya said, there's no such a thing. The same way it went in, the same way it got out. The bigger miracle is not how it gets out. The bigger miracle is how it came in. Don't you understand that the greatest miracle of Galus is that Shchinta begalusa. The soul is a chelik elokam imal. It's a piece of God. So how did the soul ever go into this place? And the answer is because of God's infinity. The soul has a power to go to places that are incredibly dark because it's infinite. It remains infinite. So the greatest challenge is how it got in. How is it that infinity could look finite? How is it that something so beautiful and so amazing and so incredible and so liberated could seem so confined and in shackles? I once heard there was the former chief rabbi of Britain, Rabbi Jonathan Sacks, Olav Shalom. He was a very brilliant man. And I once heard he shared a story, a very moving story. He said that when he was studying in Cambridge University, he came from a British home, They weren't very religious. They would go to shul on Shabbos, but it was a traditional home, but not a very religious home. And after the 6-Day War, he was 20 years old. He was born in 1948. So after the 6-Day War in 1967, he was really shaken up. And he was a smart kid. And he started a search. He started to search for his spiritual and Jewish identity. And he came to America in the summer of 68. This is after the 6-Day War, almost a year after the 6-Day War, a year after the 6-Day War. And he went on a Greyhound bus for a few months. And he went to visit different sages and Jewish intellectuals to speak to them. He went like to 50 of them, he said. Anyway, so he said that one visit he came to the Lubavitcher Rebbe, and it was the middle of the night that he got his audience, and he was there for like 2 hours, and he asked all of his questions. He had a bunch of questions on philosophy and history and faith and Emunah and Torah, all these types of questions. And he asked them for close to 2 hours, and the Rebbe answered. Finally, he was done. He was 20 years old, and he's about to leave the room. And the Rebbe said, "You asked me so many questions. Can I ask you a question?" He didn't expect that. "What type of question would you want to ask me?" He says, "You're studying in Cambridge, so I would like to know, what are you doing for Jewish life in Cambridge University?" That's my question. So Rabbi Sachs, I'm saying what he said. Rabbi Sachs says, "I wasn't doing anything for Jewish life in Cambridge. I wasn't interested in doing anything for Jewish life in Cambridge. My entire Jewish identity was unbalanced. I was struggling with it. That's what I was trying to figure out, who I am, who I'm not, how Jewish am I, how involved do I want to be?" But he said, "I'm not going to tell the Rebbe I'm a nice British boy. I'm not going to tell him I'm not interested. It's not how a British gentleman talks. It's not American. I'm not interested. It's British. It's man. Even if I'm sending you to jump into the lake, it's with etiquette. I'll give a bathing suit, I'll give a towel, I'll give maybe 2 towels, whatever it is, So he tells the Rebbe, he said he didn't even know what he's going to say, but he started to formulate this eloquent answer. He says, "Well, in the situation I find myself in," and he just wanted to in the situation, whatever, he'll come up with something, I'm doing like 9 PhDs and I sleep like 6 minutes a night, whatever the end of the sentence would be. And he said the Lubavitcher Rebbe interrupted him in the middle of his sentence. And that was very unique, because the Rebbe would not interrupt people. He would let everybody say what they said, and then he would respond. But here he interrupted him. And he said, a person never finds himself in a situation. A person puts himself in a situation. And when you put yourself in one situation, you can always think about putting yourself in a different situation. I think that you can have an amazing influence on Cambridge University and on Anglo jury. And in fact, if you would ask me, I believe that part of your soul's mission is to be a rabbi's rabbi. Now, telling this to a 20-year-old kid who wasn't sure if he's an atheist, if he's an agnostic, how Jewish he is, it was like, what? Right? He said this a few days after he became the chief rabbi of the United Kingdom in the 1990s, I think 1990 or 1991. It was fascinating. But I thought to myself, why did he interrupt him in the middle of a sentence? And then I realized, because that itself was the message. We all have that sentence playing in our head, the situation I find myself in. And who doesn't find themselves in situations? Let's face it. We don't put ourselves in all of our situations. Some situations I put myself in, like you came to this class. You put yourself in this situation. But so many situations in life, let's face it, we find ourselves in them. And even if we put ourselves in, and how dumb were we when we put ourselves in those situations? I mean, forgive me. Young, immature, dumb, stupid, naive, clueless, and spineless too. So it's like, did I really put myself in that situation? I mean, come on. I didn't. We talk about people having free choice. It's true. But to have free choice, you have to have so much awareness. You have to be so aware of who you are and what your capabilities are. How many things did we choose in life, quote unquote? You and I know they were not done by choice. They were done because of profound fear. They were done because of profound wounds. They were done because of profound need to people please, or other needs which I felt or you felt that they were what you needed to survive at the time. How many options did we really have? To have choice, you have to really have an expansive consciousness. And you have to have a very, very powerful self-confidence. How many people have that? Present company excluded. I'm talking about real deep confidence. And that's what the Rebbe was teaching him. The Rebbe was teaching him, there's a part of us that's stuck. There's no question. And that's what they were saying. You're stuck in an egg. I don't care how big your soul is, you're stuck. And Rabbi Yehoshua ben Hanania said, no, you're missing the truth. That the soul's journeys come from a very deep place of choice, even if it's not a choice that makes sense. Rabbeinu Bechaya writes in Parshas Kiseitze, something very, very deep. And I know it's not easy to say, and it has to be said with a lot of sensitivity. And he says that every soul, before it comes down to this world, is shown all of its experiences. And it has to choose and agree to each and every one of them in order to come down to this world. In other words, what does this mean? Come on! How many of us would be more than happy to press Control, Alt, Delete on a few people or a few events in our life? I once told a story at a lecture, so somebody in the crowd says, without names, who was it? Right? So, we're not going to get into names, who you want to delete or what you want to delete. You know it on your own and it's none of my business. But come on, what does this mean? The answer is, the moment I answer this logically, I am failing you and I'm failing me, because this is not logic. This is not al pi seichel. It makes sense according to the statistics and according to the psyche that I figured out with my life coach, that this is the work I should go into. That's chelkeinu. You should do that. If there's a job you're good at, go and make a lot of money and do a lot of good things and give a lot of tzedakah. There's man yerushaseinu. There's our genetic pool that we inherit. But then there's goyer aleinu. There's goyer aleinu, the things that seem random, because they're this shlichus. It's a mission of the soul that comes from the deepest place of the etzem, of the core. That's what Mordechai said. Esther, this is something called mi yodeya. Hashem put your soul here. Why Esther Hamalka has this mission, I don't know. And what happened when he said that to her? A new person was born. Till that point in the Megillah, Esther is very passive. She listens to everything he says, and the Megillah says she doesn't say a word. In fact, the word Esther means hidden. She was hidden. She doesn't say a word. She's really reacting. Suddenly at that point, what happens right after that? She starts giving the instructions. And now Mordechai is listening to her. Till that point, he says, she listens. She's a good girl. Isha Ksheira. What does the Chazal say? Isha Ksheira Oiser Etzayim Baila, right? A good woman does her husband's will. I just opened up a Pandora box, I know that. But here's what the Baal Shem Tov said. So this is my second Pandora box. Isha Ksheira, a really good woman. Oiser Etzayim Baila, she creates her husband's will. Oisa. Oisa could mean do. Oisa means create. She creates it. I once went for, this is a funny story. I once went for a Shabbaton to Milwaukee. And so I was sitting with the rabbi who invited me. His name is Rabbi Rappaport. He was taking us to his shul, or to his home from the airport. So my wife was sitting with his wife in the back seat, and I was sitting with the rabbi in the front seat. He was driving, and I was in the passenger seat. So we were talking. But Rebbetzin Rappaport, we were like a year married, so I heard she's giving my wife marriage advice about me. And because she thought I was having a conversation with her husband, so she was talking freely. I was having a conversation, but I was eavesdropping. I wanted to hear the advice my wife is getting. So I hear her tell my wife, as I'm talking to Rabbi Rappaport, but I could multitask sometimes a little bit, even though I'm a man. And that is, she says, with men, I know with my husband, probably with your husband, like, it's all going to be your idea, but let him believe that it was his idea. Just let him believe that it was his idea. It's much better for Shalom Bayis. Okay. I just told this to my wife a few months ago. I said, I heard that piece of advice. That's probably what you just did, right? She says, you heard it? You heard it 25 years ago? I said, yeah, I heard it. Gewaltige advice. Anyway, so she said, I can't believe you heard it and you remember it. Of course I remember it. It's what I live with. To know that there's nothing that's my idea. I'm just a channel. That's it. That's what I live with. So, Isha Ksheira Oisa. It's fascinating. You read in the Megillah, till this point, Esther is passive. At this point, she's suddenly running everything. She tells Mordechai, okay, go gather all the Jews. I want you to make a fast. I'll go into the king. Suddenly she's inviting him to one party. She's throwing parties. Suddenly she becomes a party planner, an administrator. She's inviting drinks. She knows who's coming. She starts creating this web, and she gets her husband and Haman enraptured, completely enveloped in her web until she wins, and the Jewish people are saved. Something happened to her. What happened? like a new soul was born. She realized she's not in an egg. She journeyed into places because she has such an infinite power to go to places that nobody can go. She didn't end up there by mistake. Her soul placed her there with the resources, knowing that for some incredible and inexplicable reason, there's a light in her that can penetrate this darkness. And let's face it, we're all here today because of that woman called Esther. And that's why it's not called Megillus Mordechai, it's not called Megillus Esther or Mordechai, it's not called Megillus Mordechai's Esther, it's called ultimately only Megillus Esther. So Purim is like Yom Kippur. This Geirel is the two goats. And the two goats end up in completely different places. And we sometimes want to blame this. Maybe two of your children have two completely different journeys that we don't understand. And maybe you have a journey that's very different than your sibling, very different than your friend. You know, you look at your classmates, you remember? Think of your classmates many years ago and where everybody ended up in life. It's very fascinating to see. And sometimes, you know, you have these class WhatsApps from like classmates from many years ago, you know, where everybody is in life and everyone's situation. And sometimes people are very narrow and they think, you know, that their orbit, that's the only orbit that exists. But it's very fascinating and sometimes it's tragic and it's always very moving to see different journeys. And a lot of those journeys seem completely things that people couldn't expect and couldn't plan. And we have that part of our brain that says, I'm stuck, I'm just in despair, and it's normal. And that's the egg. And the egg holds the chick in prison, and there's no way the spirit is going to get out. Rabbi Shimon Charanya said the same way it got in. It got out. The bigger miracle is that it got in. You don't understand what the human soul is. The human soul is divine. The divine is infinite. Nobody can destroy the divine. When the divine goes into an egg, it's not stuck. It's infinite. The only reason it went in there is in order to be able to break open the egg and to transform the egg too. So the soul says, but I don't have the resources for it. I don't have the resources for it. So now he comes to the cheeses. And he says, and what happened with both of these goats? Do we look at the second goat that goes to the Azazel and we say, oh, this is the dark goat, this is the helpless goat? No, we say this is the goat of atonement. This is the goat of forgiveness. The scarlet red thread on the goat became white. So the black goat, black I don't mean physically black, the goat that represented darkness also transforms itself into white cheese. We don't look at sin or mistakes as just the negative decomposition of the human being. On the contrary, the Gemara says in Yom Peivav, when a person does tshuva out of love, their sins become mitzvahs. Because every mistake we make, even a sin that we make, has the ability to create a new momentum and a new thirst and a new awareness and a new yearning that is much deeper than the thirst I had earlier. The famous words, Tzamalecha nafshi, kamalecha basari, be'eretz siyav ayev b'li mayim. When I'm in a parched desert without water, there's a thirst, there's a yearning that I could have never had anywhere else. They say that IBM had a manager, his name was Thomas Watson, a legendary manager. And there was somebody who made a terrible mistake in the company, and he cost the company $10 million. In those days, it's still a nice amount of money. In those days, it was astronomical. I read this like around 20 years ago. And he gave in his resignation papers the next morning. He said, I'm so sorry. It was a horrible mistake. And I feel so bad. And with tears in his eyes, he came into Mr. Watson. He gave in his resignation papers. He said, I'm just leaving you to owe me nothing. And I wish I could pay back the money. He was really loyal, but he just made a horrible mistake. And Watson says, where are you going? He says, well, I'm resigning, so you shouldn't have to fire me. No severance pay. I'm just leaving. That's the least I can do. He says, you're leaving? I just spent $10 million on your education. Where are you leaving? You're not leaving anyway. You're staying right here. I don't spend $10 million on your education and let you go. And he remained, and he became, one of probably the most loyal employee they could have gotten. The moment my mistakes become a source for renewal, it's part of my education. So the sin itself becomes a mitzvah. So the cheese, Rabbi Shimon Chananya says, the cheese of the second goat is as white as the cheese of the first goat. We don't look at Yom Kippur as a bad day. We see Yom Kippur and Purim as equal. Because even the challenges and the journeys and even the mistakes, the situations I find myself in, I realized my soul put me there. And the reason it put me there is because I wasn't sold, I was sent. This was the power of Yosef we always speak about. He was also put in all these situations. He went into a pit. He sold himself into slavery. He ended up in prison. He didn't end up he put himself there. It's not true. He ended up in all these places. He found himself in these places. What changed him? Exactly what happened with Esther. He told his brothers, you did not sell me. God sent me. What's the difference? If I was sold, I am a passive victim, like a ping pong ball, thrown from here to here to there to there. Yosef said that didn't happen. I'm not stuck in an egg. My soul was sent into difficult places. I don't know why. Why me? I don't know. I don't know. I'm not going to try to use my finite mind to figure out infinite mysteries. Because when we use our finite mind to figure out infinite mysteries, we reduce the experience, we reduce the opportunity, we reduce our energy. We need to control it. And when I have to control it, Esther knew this is a moment she needs to become a queen. She has to flex her muscles and expand. She went into a different mode. She single-handedly knew the Jewish people's future lay in my hands the way God chose me right now as a channel, and she was a different person. It's like something overtook her that is transcendent. You could see it in the Megillah. Like a new soul. She got a new soul. She was not stuck in any egg. Rabbi Shimon Chananya says when you understand how you came in, you always know how you go out. That's why every morning we say the first things. Did you hear the recording from that boy who was killed in Nova, Yehuda Becher, Elikai Neshama, Shenasata B'Tahira? He was on the way to the festival and his friend called him that he's depressed, so he made a video of himself singing the song Neshama Shenasata B'Tahira. And he sent it to him. A few hours later, he was murdered. His soul went back to heaven. So we say every morning, Neshama Shenasata B'Tahira. Because you have to know where you came from, how you got in order to know how I use my circumstances and even my body itself to heal, to bring awareness, to bring rejuvenation with a lot of compassion and empathy. So Rabbi Yehoshua ben Chananya shows these two pieces of cheese and he says, you don't get it. The dark goat produced the white cheese, just like the white goat. It produced healing and cleansing just like the other goat. We don't believe that there's a real duality. This is the Holy of Holies and this is the Azazel. God is here and this is darkness. There's the house of light, there's the house of darkness. There's God and there's Satan, and they have two different worlds and one rules here and one rules there. It's both beautiful white cheese and delicious cheese. So Rabbi Yehoshua Chananya says, now you'll understand with the two eggs. We don't look at the 3 weeks and saying, they canceled out the 3 weeks of joy. That's not how we look at the 3 weeks. We look at the 3 weeks as a journey into a difficult place of darkness in order to transform it. The reason we don't recognize one egg from another egg is not because depression is more powerful than joy and pessimism is more powerful than optimism and bad cancels out good and evil cancels out light and negativity cancels out positivity and darkness cancels out light and triumphs over light and everything is random and you don't even see the difference. It's because from the Jewish perspective, everything is light. The 21 days of joy and the 21 days from Shivasa B'Tammuz to Tisha B'Av are equal. That's why you don't identify. It's just a different path. There's two forms of light in life. There's the light that we see as light. And then there's light that we see as darkness. That light that we see as darkness is a different type of light. It's the light that is waiting for us to transform the darkness into light. It's a difficult journey. And I know I'm speaking about this and I'm feeling a little guilty even saying this because I know different levels of darkness that people are dealing with. So it could sometimes seem chas v'shalom callous. But trust me, you can hear it in my words, this is not coming from callousness. This is coming from endless sensitivity and profound sensitivity and awareness of the challenges that people go through. And to understand that in many ways, when I conclude and I say this is just dark, it sounds normal and it sounds rational, but ultimately I'm betraying the truest depth of my soul. Because your soul is never ever dark. There's no such a thing. The soul is a chelik elokam imal. It always has infinite light. It was sent into very dark places. Sent, not sold. Why was it sent into those places? I don't know why. You were sent here, you were sent here, I was sent here, this person was sent here. Nobody knows these things. Mi yodeya, it's beyond us. And that's why Purim and Yom Kippur are so connected. Yom Kippur is the one day Achaz B'Shana. It's higher than Seichel. You go into the Holy of Holies of the soul beyond Seichel. Purim was the same thing. Esther didn't go into the Holy of Holies. You know where she went in? She went into Achashverosh's Beis Hatzlamim, the opposite of the Holy of Holies. How do you compare these 2 days? Because Esther understood that when she went into that place, this was her Holy of Holies. This is where she had to find Hashem. In the Azazel mountain, in Achashverosh's chamber, that place, the lion's den, for her, that was the Holy of Holies, because that's where she found the shlichus, the mission that was on her. So those are the 2 goats he's talking about. They both created this white cheese. That was Esther's power, Esther's uniqueness. And because of that, they come and say, 21, 21, you can't even identify one from the other. He says that's exactly the point. They don't cancel out the first days. They're an extension of those days. There is the joy that seems like joy, and there is the joy that comes camouflaged in all types of struggles and obstacles of darkness. And those are the 3 weeks. And that's why the Rambam says that all the fast days, including Shivasa B'Tammuz and Tisha B'Av when Mashiach comes, will be Yomim Tovim, will become holidays. In fact, the Medrash says that the greatest Yom Tov of the year will be Tisha B'Av. And may we see that this year. And the question is, why the biggest Yom Tov of the year? I understand there'll be a Beis HaMikdash, Mashiach will come, we'll cancel the fast. I'm game. I don't love the Tisha B'Av fast, even though it's sometimes good for the other things. But I could do that other days too. And doesn't have to be 24 hours. But why the biggest Yom Tov? The answer is, Rabbi Shlomo Chananya says, because both eggs contain within them very, very powerful positive energy. Here you have to crack the shell, you have to crack the egg, pun intended, to extract it. But when you extract it, you're going to see that the entire purpose of it was just to bring a person to the greatest level of infinite light, much beyond the other light. And with this answer, Rabbi Shlomo Chananya, he articulated the secret of Jewish resilience. What's the secret of... Rabbi Shlomo Chananya lived 1900 years ago, and it was a dark time. Now think about this 1900 years later, where we are today. What was the secret of Jewish resilience? What is the secret of Jewish resilience? It's this answer. They come with 2 eggs. And it's like, it's all random. It's a dark, crazy, meshugana world. And if you don't believe me, you just follow the news and you'll see this is a dark, crazy, insane world. So what are you making? This egg, that egg. So you have your Yom Kippur, your Rosh Hashanah, your Shana Rabbah, Sukkot, and then you have your Tisha B'Av, your Shivasa B'Tammuz. And it creates an attitude of cynicism or despair. Rabbi Shlomo Chananya says the Jewish approach was exactly opposite. The whole world is leading towards Geula. The whole world is leading towards Mashiach. The insanity and the darkness of the world is not from nowhere. The pasuk says in Iyov, Kates Sam Lachoshech. Darkness has an end because it has a beginning. Darkness is not absolute. Darkness emerged from the source. And therefore, even though rationally and emotionally things could be very, very difficult with a person, and we have to embrace with empathy all of our experiences, repression and denial and cutting it off and blaming and shaming a person for experiencing the Azazel experience is wrong. There's 2 goats and they have different experiences. And during Tisha B'Av we don't dance like we dance on Simchat Torah. There are different experiences, different halachas. The 9 days have different halachas than Sukkot. That's in terms of the structure of life. But in terms of understanding and appreciating the depth of the journey, it's really the power of a neshama that has the emunah and the faith and the connection to eternal light and knows, Jewish people knew in their DNA that the whole journey of Gullus is a journey of Gullus towards Gula. And even now, if you look at the Jewish people now, if you look at it from a natural perspective, it's so easy to be discouraged. But then you open up the heart of the Jewish people today, and the feeling of the Jewish people is that we're about to see grand miracles. We're about to see enormous nisim. We're about to see a whole world, enemies from all sides, that have Rahman al-Itzlan one agenda like Haman had. And from the same place, Persia. And just like you had then the Esther that we just spoke about, who was never a victim to circumstances, but she went into a place of miyadeya, a place beyond seichel, and opened herself up to that place. And everything is transformed. Because the Jewish people's connection to light and positivity is essential, it's intrinsic. It's knowing that Einoid Mulvade, the whole world is godliness, and the whole journey of Gullus is a journey of 3 weeks towards Mashiach, towards Geula, towards redemption. And the obstacles in the way are painful and very difficult to understand. And certainly there's brutality that is mind-staggering and mind-boggling. I don't have to elaborate on that. We know that individually, we know that collectively, especially today with all the challenges facing our holy brothers and sisters in Israel and the loss and so on and so forth and the hostages. And yet even in a deeper place in our soul, Rabbi Yehoshua ben Chananya says that ultimately the Jewish people see the light of the sun, we see the cheese, we see the whiteness, we see the cleansing, we see redemption, we see the opportunity of the Jewish people to open themselves up to their true infinite calling and consciousness and become receptacles of grand transformative miracles that will bring a new consciousness into the world, beginning by bringing in a new consciousness into our life. And here finally, and with this we want to close it up. I told you I want to go through the riddles. We'll do the last riddle, which you'll get pretty fast. They say to him, the second to the last, what does one do to harvest a field of knives? What's the problem? Why can't you harvest a field of knives? Bring metals that can cut knives. The problem is we walk on fields. How do you walk on fields of knives? You can't. And he says, with the horn of a donkey. Now tell me, you ever tried taking the horn of a donkey and cutting a field of knives, harvest it? What type of answer is? They say a donkey doesn't have horns. And he says, well, a field has no knives. What type of joke is this? And the Marsha says something amazing. They look at Rabbi Yehoshua and they say, why are you a happy person? Wherever you walk, this is a field of knives. Wherever Jews walk, it looks like there's fields of knives waiting to cut you down. Why are you walking around happy? It's a field of knives. This world is such a dangerous place for you. This is what they tell Rabbi Yehoshua ben Chananya. How do you harvest these knives? How do you get rid of these knives? And he says, we have karna de chamra. Chamra is the donkey. The Marsha says it's referring to the donkey of Mashiach. Ani v'roichav al hachamar, Scharius says. And the keren represents the horn. The horn represents melucha. The malachim were nimshach b'keren, they were anointed with the horn. The keren represents the glory. V'yareim, it says by Chana, v'yiten oiz lamalkai v'yareim, keren mishichai. Rabbi Yehoshua ben Chananya says we have karna de chamra. We have the horn of the donkey. We don't see these knives as real absolute representation of infinite darkness. Keitzam lachayshach. We're ambassadors of the divine in this world. There's eternity, there's goodness, there's Einoid Milvadi despite all the challenges. They say this is an illusion. A donkey has no horn. And he says, and the field has no knives. These knives that you're seeing as cutting you down is from your perspective, where you don't understand the entire journey of what life is. You see darkness as intrinsic and absolute. But when you see darkness as a channel, as an opportunity, I wasn't sold, but I was sent, then everything is different. That's the karna, the chamra that Rabbi Yehoshua ben Chananya was talking about, even though they said, oh, we don't see no donkey and we don't see no horn. He says, right, that's true, you don't. And therefore, when he brought out those two cheeses, and he represented that you see that the two goats both bring cleansing, even the negative goat. It brought out how even the 3 weeks, with all the darkness, it's really an invitation. It's an opportunity to open up one's consciousness, to open up one heart. To my very difficult challenges, breathe divine light into them, and ultimately in our own life, transform each one according to their capacity, their challenge into opportunity, their obstacles into challenges, into opportunities, darkness into light. Until we see, may it be in these 9 days, the karna, the chamra, the horn of the donkey of Mashiach, tzidkeinu b'mheira b'yameinu, amen. Thank you.